Good morning and welcome to Bloomberg. I am truly honored and frankly humbled to be here today and to be given this opportunity to address all of you at this conference, which I believe is so very important given the world we live in today. When I was first asked to give this keynote address, I was a bit confused and frankly unsure of what I would be able to offer to such an engaged and distinguished group. Prior keynotes have been addressed by experts in this space, armed with data, or CEOs of companies who can eloquently and extensively describe their vision for their companies. I'm neither an expert or a CEO, but what I can offer to you perhaps is some insight into my own personal journey and observations as a person of faith and how I have sought to navigate the various aspects of my identity in my life and in my career. You see, I've spent much of my life over the past 42 odd years living and oscillating between two closets. One where I would retreat to hide my faith as a practicing Shia Muslim, and another where I sought refuge from the knowledge at a young age that I was gay. In many ways, these closets are not so different. They exist in part because of shame and fear, and they go to the heart of our most intimate relationships. For me, they were byproducts of the vulnerability I felt as a child, constantly feeling insecure and unsure of where I fit in. They were places where I sought refuge from taunts and teasing and incessant bullying. Sanctuaries where periodically, and depending on the environment, I believed I needed to hide so that I could fulfill my true potential. These are closets where even now I sometimes feel the tug to retreat. And while these closets share these similarities, in my experience, there are fundamental differences in the way we approach them when we step out of them. Over the years, as I told my close friends and colleagues that I was gay, I was regularly encouraged to come out publicly and to share this part of my identity with my family and my colleagues at work. You need to be authentic, I was regularly told. Hiding your sexuality only hurts you in the long run, and you have an obligation as a young, successful lawyer to show young gay teenagers that it gets better. And so when I finally decided to be open about my sexuality, I was celebrated, patted on the shoulder, and welcomed by members of the LGBT community and many allies. At work, I found the support of employee resource groups dedicated exclusively to the support of the gay community. There were company-wide pride celebrations filled with rainbows and networking opportunities and programming. I suddenly had access to gay senior executives and mentors who were willing to advise whenever possible. I remember one senior partner at a law firm who took me aside and told me that he was so pleased that I came out and that he would take it upon himself to look out for me. Within weeks, I was placed on one of his most high-profile cases, and any fear I had about coming out at work dissipated. I recognize that this experience is not universal, that coming out as gay at the workplace can be challenging, and that the experience I described is a recent phenomenon and in part reflective of the times of where I am, where I worked, and the gift of living in such a tolerant city as New York. But my personal experience of coming out as a practicing Muslim was in many ways very different. For years, I downplayed or hid the level of my religiosity. Indeed, while some individuals knew I came from a Muslim background, my name is a bit of a giveaway, they were not aware that I prayed multiple times a day, that I continued to attend religious services throughout the week, that the extent to which my faith truly impacts every decision I make and the way I choose to live my life. Because for me, Islam is not just a faith, but a way of life. But when asked what I was doing on Friday night, I always deflected the conversation to avoid revealing that I was going to services instead of happy hour. The instinct to retreat and hide was only exasperated after 9/11, where fears and discrimination against Muslims reached an all-time high. As a newly minted lawyer at one of the largest and most politically connected law firms in the country, I looked around and saw no other Muslim lawyers amongst my colleagues, many of whom were advising the government on how to respond to these attacks. I felt scared, terrified, and alone. The feeling of isolation and uncertainty was only further reinforced when I went to clerk for 2 federal judges who had never hired a Muslim before. Over time, as anti-Muslim rhetoric continued to rise, I realized that I had an obligation, as uncomfortable as it was, to be more open about my identity and about my whereabouts on Friday night. Because I knew that I would be the only Muslim these lawyers and judges who were making decisions about Muslims would have an opportunity to interact with on a regular basis. And so I began the process of slowly revealing to colleagues the extent of my faith and what an integral part it plays in my daily life. And yet this was never celebrated, nor was I really encouraged to talk about it. There was no lecture about authenticity or about being a role model for children of faith. No discussion about how it was important for me to bring my true self to work every day as a Muslim. There was no employee resource group where I could turn to for support, particularly at times when I felt so vulnerable and afraid. There was no month-long celebration, nor any acknowledgement of the religious holidays that are so important to me and my community. And there were certainly no senior executives who I could look up to as role models or who indicated a desire to mentor me as a result of my faith. In fact, I was called upon to explain and defend my faith and to be a spokesperson for over 1 billion followers and practitioners of Islam who practice in all different forms and traditions. One federal judge who I clerked for would respectfully and repeatedly ask me to explain and justify specific passages of the Quran that he had found and felt supported violence. Not an expert on Islam or the Quran, I tried to answer as best I could, only then to retreat and stay silent again about my faith. We talk a lot about diversity and inclusion in the corporate space, and we have made great strides. But some people make the mistake of thinking that pluralism requires us to dilute or de-emphasize our own distinctive identities. That is not the case. What it requires is to ensure that one's individual identity is strong enough to engage and connect confidently with those of other identities. Connection does not necessarily mean agreement. It means that we connect with one another in order to learn from one another and to build our future together. That strength to engage and the ability to connect, however, requires an enabling and supportive environment that recognizes and respects all types of difference and diversity, including people of faith. And so as you proceed today, I hope you ask yourselves some key questions. Are we creating a space where people of faith feel that they can be truly open about this aspect of their lives? Are we providing a sufficient level of support to them as we do other communities? When we ask our colleagues what did they do over the weekend, how often do they leave out the practice of their faith from their list of activities, and why? Are we providing adequate and reasonable religious accommodations in our workplace? And more importantly, are we making it clear that it's okay to ask for those accommodations? At a time when Islamophobia, xenophobia, and anti-Semitism are on the rise, and forces seek to make certain groups feel unwelcome, are we as corporations ready to speak out and advocate for religious minorities and acceptance? Back in 2015, almost 400 corporations signed on to a Supreme Court amicus brief in support of a legal challenge to gay marriage bans across the country. It was a powerful statement that was heralded as a significant moment in the fight for equality. Fast forward 2 years later, some of these same corporations never publicly spoke out or joined any challenges to the government's travel ban that targeted and sought to marginalize Muslims here and around the world. Are those corporations ready to answer and explain why and when they speak for some, but not for others? Ultimately, each of us must engage in an honest self-form of reflection about whether we are doing enough to ensure that all employees feel valued and respected and can be authentic at work every day, regardless of the political winds. The answer to these questions, I believe, is not just critical to reaching the promise of a more just and inclusive society, but it also, as we know, makes good business sense. Because we all know that when we create a space where all employees feel they are valued and respected and can be their true selves, it makes us all better employees and ultimately better and more productive companies. At Bloomberg, I feel tremendous gratitude to be at a place that fully promotes diversity in all its forms, and where for the first time in my life, I have felt truly comfortable and supported as an openly gay Muslim. There is no wasted energy trying to figure out when to hide or what to reveal. Rather, my difference is viewed as a strength and as an asset to be leveraged for an increasingly global company. Indeed, as a company, we have begun taking steps to acknowledge religious diversity in the workplace. Next week, for example, we are hosting a moderated panel discussion on the significance of Ramadan and what it means for observant employees. Earlier this year, we did take a public stand and sign on to a corporate amicus brief supporting the challenge to the Trump administration's travel ban. And of course, our relationship with the Tannenbaum Center, which goes back several years, is critical to these efforts. Along with hosting this conference, the center has helped us to lead inclusion dialogues with our managers to help them to understand how to address religion in the workplace. We thank you for your tremendous support, and we look forward to our continued partnership. But there is still much work that needs to be done for all of us. Talking about religion is difficult and uncomfortable. Even for myself, this speech has been not an easy one to deliver. And events and policies are not enough to create a culture of acceptance, which demands great openness of spirit and mind and generosity. It requires us to examine our own prejudices and unconscious biases, and most of all, courage to face uncomfortable truths and to make thoughtful decisions. I applaud all of you for being here and having the courage to engage in these difficult conversations with that openness and generosity that is needed to make meaningful change. Because at the end of the day, each of us bears a responsibility of ensuring that everyone can find a space where they do not need to feel the need to hide or retreat, and where they can reach their full potential because, not despite, their differences. Thank you very much.